So, salam alaikum, everybody. Masal khair, ahlan wa sahlan. And that's it. That's all the Arabic you'll get out of me this evening. So, first of all, welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. We didn't quite plan this well, so obviously we've got National Day tomorrow here in the Kingdom, but we didn't want to delay it much longer, the webinar, because we're a little bit overdue, and also we wanted to give an update on our inaugural regional awards as well. So so if we just move through the slide. So today as I said, I will go through the awards, give a little bit more information, and also we got two presenters today. So James, who you'll meet a little bit later, myself, and then as usual we will finish up with a little bit of Q&A at the end. We should finish about just after 7 o'clock, maybe 10 past 7. Usual for those who've been on our webinars before, big thank you. Obviously in this case it's to James, because for pulling together the slides, and I'm not allowed to thank myself, but I will anyway. Questions as we go along, just drop them into the chat or the questions capability in the webinar software, or message me on LinkedIn. I will group them together at the end. We are recording this, so either if you want to watch again, or for those who've registered. So I think as of earlier in the week, we'd over 50 registered. I know that's gone up. I know a lot of people like to watch the recordings afterwards. And then lastly, for certificates of attendance. So if you do need one, whether it's just for your workplace, for your CPD, for the IRM or another institute, just let me know. Message me through LinkedIn, and I will produce that for you. So just for those who are not aware, just a little bit of a sort of reminder about the Institute of Risk Management. It's one of the largest networks. It's probably of risk professionals globally. You'll see that up on the left-hand side, with a range of qualifications, which you'll see on the right-hand side, from certification all the way up to diploma. And as I say on these webinars, you know, there only is one certificate in risk management, and that is from the IRM. It is the gold plate. If you want to pay $300 and go onto a few multiple choice questions over the weekend and get a certificate, that's fine. It's our money. But just, you know, in terms of if you're dedicated to this profession, there is only one route. And so that's just a little reminder. If you go on the website, the IRM provide a wealth, even sometimes some specialist training sessions as well. So do have a look at that. And then on the bottom right, a little bit about the IRM. It brings recognition, knowledge, network, career support. And actually as a regional group, it's very much what we do as well. Even we have in the past helped to find people jobs, where we've emailed around CVs around this community of practice in the Kingdom as well. So a little bit about the IRM. Moving on, who are we? I won't go through this slide, you've seen it before, but it's very much keywords are there, networking. Obviously before we hosted physical events, we will get there one day again. CPD opportunities, so hopefully through these webinars, it allows you just to sort of refresh yourself on some of the current thinking, also challenge yourself as well. And then going down, it's very much about promoting. Obviously, we're associated with the IRM, but it's not just the IRM, it's just the value of risk management in general across the Kingdom. That is one of the purposes of this group. And what about today? So today is about sharing experiences. So we're lucky to have James on. Opinion, you may agree, disagree. As we come through the questions, it's about constructive discussion and learning. Diversity of thought, yeah, so that's probably the key thing, is it's to create a safe environment for us to have differing opinions. Yeah, we will not always agree on every point. So listen today and allow some of the points today to challenge yourself. In terms of our look ahead, so we normally run 4 events a year. This year we tried to go for 5, didn't quite happen. So July we sort of binned that one, and so today we've got the event in September, leading to our award ceremony, which I will touch on. As always, we're always looking for presenters. Always do come back, get in touch if you're interested. Sometimes if you want to share a presentation, maybe with a colleague, so jointly. Normally the presentations are about 15 to 20 minutes. So, sort of around about 5 to 10 slides. That's all we're looking for. Just a little bit of a shout out as well. So as we have a number of regional groups and special interest groups spread around the world, and the special interest groups in different topics. There's one coming up. So it's been organized by Alexander Larson. He looks very handsome in his LinkedIn picture. The details are on the screen. So if you can't find the details either on LinkedIn or on the IRM webpage, I'm sure if you contact Alexander on LinkedIn, he can point you in the right direction. Because of the Kingdom, the GCC, the links with energy, I thought it's something that people might find of value as well. So that's coming up in the next week or so, actually a week today. So something to watch out for. So these awards, we tried to have them last year. It didn't quite work out. We had a few problems this year, but we did not want to delay it again. So let's go into it. So do you remember I spoke about sort of some of the sort of principles or behind IRM as a professional institute, and that filtering down to a group. So you think the purpose, why are we having these awards? So it's about recognition and celebration of the value of risk management and the expertise of some of the risk professionals in our region. And we've picked up 3 categories. So first, risk management implementation of the year, public sector, and then the same for private sector, and then risk professional of the year. It's not young risk professional, it's risk professional of the year. And they are the 3 award categories that we've settled on. And I will go through in the next couple of slides about these awards. So a lot of text here. This will be communicated out, and I'll show you where to find this information in a minute as well. So a couple of things. First, for the awards, it needs to be related to our particular region. So if you're based in the Kingdom, so if you're a risk professional who's based in the Kingdom, even if you've completed some of your work outside of the Kingdom, that's fine. But or if you're somebody who's not living in the 2 kingdoms, but you've done the work in the 2 kingdoms, again, that's fine. So the key point is there has to be some link between either the work, the activity, or yourself to the kingdoms of Saudi Arabia or Bahrain. Because we've postponed this since last year, we've been this particular first awards, any activity back to 2019, and then going forward we will keep it to in-year activity. So again, just to keep it nice and open to recognize that people wanted to submit awards before. The first 2 awards could be for an individual, so something you as an individual you've implemented, either public or private sector, a team, an organization, or jointly between more than one organization. And actually we're quite relaxed. You could be for the same project, you could find the client side, public sector, submitted an award, and maybe the private sector side on the delivery side. Again, we're relaxed on that. So just sort of go away, have a think. We're trying to keep sort of this as broad as possible, so everybody, whether you're an individual, a team, an organization, you're able to submit an award against one of the categories. The third award is for individuals only, and that could be yourself or a colleague. So please think about nominating a colleague, somebody in your team, your boss, somebody on the other side of the boundary, on the client side, delivery side. So have a think about it as well. There is a form I'll go through it in a minute, but I'll just show you where it is on the IRM webpage. So hopefully this works if I drag this over. So this is the IRM webpage. If you drop down on the left-hand side to regional groups, if you drop down to the kingdoms of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, a little bit on the awards, and you'll find information here. So this is a little bit of the text you've seen just now, and here's the nomination forms. Yeah, so it's here on our website. Go and look at it. If you do have any problems, just get in touch with me, and I'll point you in the right direction. The form is for the first two categories, so implementation, public or private sector. For the risk professional, we're just looking for just free text, 500 words, something that sort of describes to us your contribution, your passion as a risk professional. It's not about years of experience. So if you know, it's not, we're not looking, telling us you're 15, 20 years. It's about you as an individual. So it doesn't matter if you have 1 year of experience, 15, 20, whatever it is. We just want you to describe in about up to 500 words about you as a risk professional in the two kingdoms. So that's something to think about. Nominations could be English or Arabic, whichever you're more comfortable submitting it in. We will ask if you can, just for a referee, we will not contact the referee without your permission. But it's just if we did have a clarification or query or something just to verify, it's just the offer of a referee. So if you can put that in as well. A couple of last things. Once you've completed the form or completed your 500 words, just email it in to us. I will email back to you to confirm receipt. And the deadline, 1700 hours, 5 o'clock on the 30th of October. So we've got 5 weeks, that should be enough. So the regional committee, we will shortlist the nominations, and very important, if we're linked any of the nominations, we will conflict, remove the relevant committee members from any shortlisting, and they will work with the IRM to help to select the winner, our winners. And we'll have a virtual event late November, possibly first week of December, to announce the awards. Any queries, email us, WhatsApp, LinkedIn. If you can't find something, you've got a query, just get in touch. And then just lastly, just on the form, just to talk you through it, nice and simple. A little bit about who's making or proposing the nominations, the name of the nomination. As I said, it could be an organization, a team, individual, or jointly, whether you're going for the public or private sector, the referee details, and just put a name, a role, organization. We will not contact them without your permission. And then this is the important thing is, for this particular award, a little bit to the background. So what was the situation or problem that you were facing? What was it you implemented, what did you actually implement, and what was the delivered value or benefit or outcome? So shouldn't take long. These are maximum guidance. You can keep it less. Fill this in. It's the template is on the website. Email it in to us, and good luck. So so that's the awards ceremony. Any queries, just get in touch. Right, on that note, it's over to James. So James, if you want to switch your webcam on.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. Can you hear and see me?
I can hear and see you, so I'm going to wave goodbye, switch my webcam off, and you just nod to me or say so when you want me to change slides, James.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Darren. Thanks to the IRM. It's so encouraging to see such a large and active group of risk professionals. I look forward to getting to know and becoming part of the network and being involved in events such as these. So thank you, Darren, for inviting me to speak. So if we go on to the agenda slide, Darren. I'll just have a brief run through of what I'll spend 10-15 minutes going over today. So I'll introduce myself, my career history. We'll look, let's say, at a traditional view of risk in real estate development, and then a couple of perhaps deviations from that. So we'll look at it from an ERM perspective and also a project risk management perspective. And this is based on, let's say, my experience rather than a traditional or theoretic view. So after those two elements, we'll look at an example of the type of risk activity that I conduct as a risk manager in real estate development company. And we'll talk very briefly at the end about quantitative risk systems and how these can be used and their benefits and some of the advantages and indeed drawbacks. And then we can go into a Q&A, which I guess will be the most valuable part of the session. Okay, so when Darren asked me to do this presentation, he requested that I start with a career history, and it struck me at that point that risk managers come to the profession and are involved in the profession from a variety of different backgrounds. You know, some people start with risk management as a degree, and indeed in my hometown of Glasgow, one of the universities there has a risk management degree in Glasgow Caledonian. Some people start their career, I guess, and stay in it throughout their career path. They may move into other disciplines at various points and come back to it. And then perhaps some people also move into risk as a career choice, having spent some time outside of risk in other functions or departments. And I suppose my own career path is the second of those. I started perhaps more years than I care to remember now in KPMG in London in 2002. I spent 3 years there in the risk advisory, risk assurance and risk consulting practice, working in a variety of industries, I would say at that point, just getting my professional skills up to scratch. So I worked in telecoms, I worked in oil and gas, I worked in financial services, so across industry, you could say. I spent 3 years in KPMG prior to moving to PwC, also in London, and my focus there was risk consulting within financial services, and then more latterly in capital projects. And that's really where my, I suppose, career within real estate development took off. So at that point, around 2008, the whole world was in a little bit of trouble, if I'm sure you all recall. And I had to think to myself whether I wanted to be in financial services, risk management for the remainder of my career, and chose not to be. So at that point, I received a job offer from Qatar Foundation subsidiary called Mashira Properties. They were a startup company based in Doha in Qatar, and I went there. So this was my first foray, my first adventure to the Middle East, and my remit there was really to set up the risk function from scratch. It was a $5 billion US project to regenerate downtown Doha. At the time, it was called Doha Land. It's now called Mashira Properties. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with it. So after 2 years, having done the initial remit, the initial mandate of setting up the risk function, I moved to Dubai. I worked for Dubai Holding, one of the subsidiary companies of Dubai Holding called TCOM Group, which is now called Dubai Holding Asset Management. And spent 10 years there. So that's really the bulk of my career has been here in the Middle East and indeed in Dubai. And you know, the TCOM Group were involved in the development of business parks and the operations of business parks. So Dubai Internet City, Dubai Media City, Dubai Design District, etc. So these were all under the remit of TCOM Group, Dubai Holding. And like I say, spent 10 years there. And since the last 6 months, I've been here in Saudi Arabia, so very happy to have made the move. My current role is the Director of Risk Management with Roshan Real Estate, which is a PIF subsidiary, and the mandate for Roshan really in line with His Highness Vision 2030 over the next few years is to develop, build, operate around 500,000 residential units. So you can imagine the scale and scope of our work. So it's very, very exciting. Looking forward to it very much, but we're just at the start of the journey of Roshan, and indeed the start of the risk management journey. So I suppose over the last 18, 19 years, I've seen a number of practices, both good and bad. I've heard a number of opinions on risk management, both good and bad, and hopefully I can share some of those with you today. So we've moved on to the next slide already, I see. Thank you, Darren. So here we have, let's say, the traditional view of risk in real estate development. And if you were to go online and Google risk management and real estate development, there's not a lot of material out there, and what does exist is perhaps somewhat contradictory. However, that said, there's a good, from a, let's say, academic standpoint, there's a very good paper that a gentleman called Thomas Wiegelman did as part of his PhD, which I found to be very useful over the course of the last few years. And he, as you can see here in this diagram, views risk, let's say, as a standalone activity within the development life cycle at the project conception stage, so the feasibility stage. And you can see here the various elements that comprise that stage: market analysis, location analysis, project concept analysis, etc. And we have a risk analysis there. And of course, that takes into account development risk, time risk, cost risk, financing, construction approvals, disposal. And that's the traditional view, I would say, but perhaps it doesn't take into account a couple of points which we can go on and talk about in the next couple of slides. So I don't think it takes into account what we as risk managers have become. So it doesn't take into account any ERM related activities that we have responsibility for, probably. And it also sees risk as a standalone, isolated, discrete activity. You see here it happens once in this life cycle, and that is where it's done. So what I'd like to talk about in the next couple of slides is perhaps an enhanced or slightly developed view of this approach. So if we can move on to the next slide, Darren, helpful, thank you. So as risk managers, you know, we all have a number of, let's say, other activities under the ERM framework that probably most of us are busy implementing. And it's not just that standalone or discrete one-off activity. There's a number of different ways that we assess risk. There's a number of different activities that we are involved in. So from my perspective, I've put down 5 pillars here that I see myself as the ERM manager as being involved in. And the first of these on the left-hand side is organizational. So you can think of this as business, organizational, departmental, or corporate risk. So each business unit will have its series of objectives, and we will do the standard risk assessment against those objectives, the achievement of those objectives. And that's really one pillar. I would say that from my experience, my perspective, risk is also assessed in a cross-functional way. So, you know, not every organization has perfectly aligned functions and departments. There are sometimes arbitrary divisions between departments in an organization. So to make sure that nothing falls between the cracks, my experience tells me that we have to do cross-functional process-driven risk assessments as well. So that forms a key part of the ERM framework that I try to implement here at Roshan. And then thirdly, there are, let's say, ad hoc risk work that happens. So last minute projects, investment opportunities, requests from shareholders or stakeholders, be it the board or anyone else, can arrive on your desk. And as the risk manager, of course, we have to respond to these. So this always plays a key role in the work that we do and the work that I've done over the years. And then the fourth pillar, and I think perhaps the most important from an ERM perspective, is the integration side of our job. So I'm a very strong believer in that risk has to be as integrated with existing business processes as possible. And we'll talk about that, what that means on the next couple of slides. I think there's a lot of benefits to be gained from utilising what exists in an organisation and attaching risk assessment and risk analysis and risk reporting to already existing processes within a business. I think that can be a very powerful tool when we're going about our business. And then from a development perspective, then obviously we have, of course, the project side of our work. And whilst that plays a key role, I would say that it's not discrete and it's not standalone, and it shouldn't happen as a one-off activity. And we'll see what I mean when we go into the next slide. So this is the basic, I would say, ERM framework of which project risk management sits within the context of a developer. So if we could go on to the next slides, please, Darren. And what we see here on this slide, this development project risk management slide, is a slightly enhanced version of the slide, the theoretical slide that we saw a few moments ago. So you see here we have the development life cycle from initiation through conception, through realization, through marketing of the project, and through operation if we are indeed operating the assets rather than selling them. And I suppose the key difference from the slide we saw a few moments ago is that, in my view, in my opinion, risk should be done at each one of these stages. The nature and extent of what that risk work will look like does indeed vary, of course, depending where we are on the life cycle of the project. But I would say that there are three features that we want to have regardless of where we are along that life cycle. And the first of these would be to initiate a risk register at the start of the life cycle. So those risks which exist at the start, right? So we're identifying land, we're acquiring land, we're procuring land, but there's risk associated with that. Can we get it? Does it meet the technical specification? Would there be any delays in that land acquisition? So it makes sense to start the risk work at the very start of the life cycle. So I would encourage and recommend for the risk registers to be started at that point. Now, for each phase of the development life cycle, I would also encourage those working in this industry to conduct a risk workshop at each phase. And you can see here that the risk register arrow, for me, goes along the whole life cycle, and the risk workshop is a very useful, powerful tool to have all the stakeholders within that life cycle involved and taking ownership of risks at their relevant stages. And the stakeholders will, of course, vary depending on where we are in the life cycle. At the start, it will be the feasibility team, it will be the investments team. As we go through, it will be, let's say, the project execution team at stage 3 through to the asset management team at stage 5. So depending on where we are in the life cycle would dictate the nature and extent of the risk work to be done at that particular point. Now within this, let's call it stage gate process, there's a number of decision points, yes, no points, certainly earlier in the cycle. And for each of those decision points and those gates, it's proven useful to me to produce a risk report. And by report, I mean a 2 or 3 page summary of the key risks which are relevant to that particular stage and submit those to the decision-making body. Let's say that's the board, or it's the investment committee, or whichever governance committee exists to progress the life cycle of the project will be in receipt of those risk reports at that particular time. So this makes sure that risk is known, it's understood, and it's acknowledged prior to moving to the next stage of the process. Now, the benefits, I think, are documented here at the bottom. So adopting this, let's say, integrated approach on a pre-existing process means that it's easily understood by the business, and this is one of the biggest challenges that I think we all have as risk management, is to make sure that our work is aligned, it has credibility, and it's understood, and it adds value. And I think aligning with an existing and well understood process like this, certainly within a development context, allows us to perform that work in a positive way, has a defined start and end, and it gives credibility, let's say, to the risk management function when we're doing it in this way. Now, what I'll do in the next slide is I'll just take one of these stages and drill down in a little bit more detail to show you exactly what this means. So I realise that that's a pretty high-level summary in the previous slide. So this is taking one of the phases, let's say the realisation phase, so effectively the construction phase. And the risks involved in this phase are contractor management, schedule, cost and quality control, change management, HSE, and really the purpose of this part of the life cycle is to make sure that the project is handed over on time and to budget. So on the left-hand side, there's a number of departments that would be involved in this: development, procurement, delivery, contracts. We as the risk team would have a number of inputs, let's say contractor details, contingency details, insurance policies perhaps. And then to facilitate this, of course, we'd have some systems and tools. And I use At-Risk, which I'm sure some of you will be familiar with. It's an Excel add-on which allows us to do Monte Carlo analysis over financial models. We also sometimes have used in the past Primavera risk analysis, although we're going through a process of acquiring Safran, which will be implemented here at Roshan over the coming months. And that allows us to do schedule and cost analysis as well. And then taking this into, let's say, indicative risks at each stage, I'm very much a believer in the 80-20 rule. So there will be 80% of the risks that are replicable and common to other projects across our portfolio or program. And the 20% would be risks that are specific to that project and that particular phase of where we are in the project life cycle. So that allows us not to reinvent the wheel every time we do this, but of course to give a degree of specificity and uniqueness to the work that we're doing in a particular project. So this slide is a bit more detail, I would say, in the risk activities that we do here. Schedule risk analysis, cost risk analysis would feed into the risk output in the context of a risk report and an updated risk register. So this really is a bit more detail on the high-level development lifecycle process. And Darren, if you move to the next slide. Thank you. And the last slide here that I want to go over briefly, I'm sure those of you who work within, say, capital projects or real estate company have probably heard or used these systems before. I find it incredibly helpful and powerful actually to quantify our risk exposure as much as possible. It's a language that when presented to senior executives within the business, if you speak in terms of cost and you speak in terms of potential delays and you give numbers to both of those risks, then it becomes an easier conversation to have in terms of implementing mitigation strategies. So these are the two let's say, go-to systems that I've used in the past and will be using going forward. Palisades at Risk, which is the Excel add-in, and then also Safran, which, as I mentioned, does the schedule risk analysis and also the cost risk analysis as well. And that's it, actually. So that's a relatively whistle-stop tour my career and my experience and what we're planning to do here at Roche, and indeed what has happened over the last few years within the various companies that I've worked for. I hope you found that useful, and I'm open, of course, to any questions and insights that you may have.
So amazing, really good presentation, James. And I was scribbling notes down. So I'm going to refer back to some of your points actually in my presentation. This wasn't planned, but actually both our presentations sort of complement each other, and I've already, so I will be referring back to you. So excellent. So what we'll do is, so I have a few questions are starting to pop up. So what I'll do is I will present now, and then we will gather together a few questions at the end for James and I to answer. So thanks, James. So I shall speak to you in a few minutes after I'm done. That's great. Thanks. So okay. So risk process. So what I've done, when I was trying to think of what to present, at the minute, we're just finalizing. For those who aren't aware, there's the Association for Project Management in the UK. It's the UK equivalent of the PMI, but we're rewriting the PRAM guide, and at the minute, so I'm writing 4 chapters. So 1 is a rewrite and 3 are brand new chapters. But one of those chapters I was asked to write was about guidance in terms of implementing risk processes. And so what I've done is I've actually pulled into these slides some of my thoughts in here. So, and just again, some of these you will agree with, some you will disagree with. It's just a point of view, and I've picked out 6 of them. So a little bit first on my career history. So just put your calculators away, because if you start adding these numbers up, you'll work out how old I am. But I've got 5 chapters, and so my early life, as James says, we don't grow up wanting to be risk managers, but I wanted to be a scientist. So my early sort of 5 or 6 years, I worked in pharmaceutical food sector, moved in then into manufacturing and operations. So and I was one of those people wearing my lab coat. I loved my lab coat, by the way. After 5 or 6 years, I started an MBA, and really I moved into a company called Risk Solutions. One of our previous presenters, Mike Roberts, who's also a committee member, was my boss, and that was my risk apprenticeship. This thing called risk, I didn't really know much about it, and I had 9 years there. I've got a little toy train. Probably most of my work was on transport, rail transport, underground. But I was so lucky. I worked across a range of amazing projects, climate change, infrastructure, incident management. But there's one little anecdote I was going back through, which relates into this one. And back in 2009, I was doing some work for the Scottish government on risks to the country, their infrastructure. They were worried about security of food supply, energy supply, and when I did the work, I went around all these sort of stakeholders, and what was coming up was a pandemic. This is back in 2009. Pandemic, if you really sort of, you can't see it, but this up here. And my report was rejected by the Scottish government, and this was in the January of 2009. And I was called up to present my work and answer questions from their Scottish resilience group, head of military, head of police, head of. And I was quite nervous, but something happened between January and April. So I presented in late April. The morning of my presentation, the World Health Organization had just declared H1N1 as a world pandemic. So think about where we are today, and And so I was called, on one hand, I was called up, they were going to reject my work. And then I was called up to sort of go to in more detail. We had a COBRA briefing that morning. So the way it works in the UK is the Prime Minister has a briefing, and he has it at maybe 8 o'clock. And what happens at 9 o'clock or half 8, there's a cascade of the briefing. And so we had some professor on, and they'd broken open the tab on the contingency plans. And we were informed it was estimated in the UK 250,000 to 500,000 people in the UK were going to die. I'm in the room. They made me sign the Official Secrets Act at the start of the meeting, and they said, Darren, you can leave now, but don't tell anybody. So you can just imagine sort of leaving that. And that was all risk-based, risk analysis, 250,000 people we estimate are going to die. We don't have enough body bags. By the end of that pandemic, which was maybe 18 months later, whilst it's unfortunate, only 457 people had died in the UK. So I use that anecdote sort of when people, experts, conduct risk analysis and they claim to be authoritative, then that's not always the case. So moving on, I then went into work for the Boeing company for 6 years, worked on some sort of amazing projects from IT security, telecommunications, Chinooks, Poseidon planes, UAVs, little stint in Hinkley Point C. I was going to stay there for a few years. I was there for 18 months. And then my last chapter, which brought me here to the kingdom. And I've been here 3.5 years. I'm on my third job. But so worked initially on the Metro project, then moved on to work within Saudi Customs, some of the infrastructure projects with ACOM. And then for the last few years, worked for an amazing company called Bahrain on ship management. So, and oil transport and all sorts of transport and logistics. So a little bit different, and it's quite interesting to see all our different pathways. So moving on. So number one, I always say avoid risk process, risk framework. I'll interchange on a slightly different thing, the wars, because I see it a lot. You know, I'm using ISO 31000. I'm using PMI process. I'm using APM process. I'm using this process. You see it a lot. And a few things to remember when you come across this is, first of all, if you look at them, they're all essentially the same. And even up here, we've got IRM's risk framework as well. Generally, there's a plan, do, check, act element. So that's the most important thing is as long as you've got those 4 fundamental things baked into your process, you're not going to be a million miles away from getting the right outcomes. Moving on, so although there are some standard frameworks out there, just whenever, it depends where you're working, is some organizations or departments will create something bespoke. So Crossrail, if you Google it, they're quite good actually as a knowledge transfer legacy. Well, the project's coming towards the end, but they've published a lot of their processes, templates, procedures right across the project, not just risk management. So, and I know in here in the kingdom, there's something called the White Book, which was originally an organization called Mashrut, was custodian, now changed to XPro. So even you'll find, so although there is sort of international standards, there are also maybe more bespoke standards you can work off. But the main thing is they've more in common than they are different. They're all, if you started mapping them across, 80 to 90% in common. So don't feel afraid if you're moving to a new organization and they have a different risk management framework. Don't worry. Where you've been working before, if you've been working off an international framework, you might need to change some of the words. You might need to say assess instead of analyze, or treat instead of control, or implement. Your terminology might change, but the fundamental principles never change. And I suppose my last piece of advice is, if you are going to take something off the shelf, so whether it's one of the project management standards, 31,000 IRM, so whatever it is, try just to configure it, small tweaks. Don't try to completely customize it. And that's probably my one piece of advice is configure small tweaks, don't fundamentally transform. So that's the first one, avoid the wars. Second one, whatever you've got, the context always changes. So, and so where you focus your process, and you saw that sort of an element of a process introduced by James as a sort of a start, a middle, end. You may find yourself dipping in or dipping out in particular areas as you move along. And that could be, as you saw the process flow, development process flow, James, you've got things like APM of something called decide, define, develop, deliver. If you work UK Defence Academy, even your business organization from startup to sort of growing to maturing, things always change. So as a risk professional, think of what resources do I need as I go, my project, my enterprise, my organization, my business unit goes along that journey. And it may be you have different projects or different parts of the organization in different parts of that journey. So you just look, what resources do I need in terms of people, IT, etc. But also as well skill sets, and that's both soft skills and hard skills. And the hard skills you touched on, James, is about when it comes to the analysis. So at what stage I need to invest in skill set around quantitative risk analysis? Is it knowledge of particular software? When do I need that? Are there key points? Is that something I need continually, or is it sort of in and out as well? So things to think about. Also as well, the context may force you to change your role from being implementation, maybe to oversight. You may find if you outsource a chunk of your organization, if you bring in a contractor and you suddenly outsource a lot of work, you may have an oversight role where you're not actually doing the work, you're not doing the identification, the analysis, somebody else is. So you have to provide maybe an assurance role. So again, something to think about as you go along. Look ahead, look where you are now, and just be aware of the context changing in the organization. Next one, this is something that trips a lot of, and it trips myself up sometimes as well. And it was actually from the last presentation from Mike, I think it was the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, touch on this a little bit. So I'm putting my own spin on it. So it's sort of, again, some of this you will agree, some you'll disagree. But if you think about at the start of something, and this, again, touching back to James's presentation, at the start of something, early concept, I've got an idea. We're going to do something. I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know whether we're going to insource it, outsource it. I don't know whether we go into make things of concrete or steel, or I don't know where we're going to build it. It's just sources of uncertainty. So really, it's not traditional risk management. And what you're trying to do is take those sources of uncertainty and try and work out sort of which ones should you focus on, which ones could have biggest impact, and what's driving that uncertainty as well, and help to inform them. And there's a little tool, it's called ABCD, and this is something somebody called Martin Cunningham, for those back in the UK, came, I think, from the rail sector. We used it in nuclear construction as well, is take your assumptions, project assumptions, organizational assumptions, whether it's the start of the budget cycle, and look down them and ask yourself two questions. How volatile is this assumption? If I think something will take 6 months, is that 4 to 7 months, or is that 1 to 12 months? And also think of criticality. And so if something could vary by 10%, but it's 1 million widgets, suddenly that's critical. So look at a combination of how volatile an assumption is, or a dependency, how critical it is to the overall success or objectives. And as you get high, pay more attention on that. Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. And if you don't have those assumptions or can't find them, I think you're going to be adding a lot of value to maybe go help the organization produce them in the first place. Then, as the sort of things move along, whether it's your project, your organization, then you can start to get into the vanilla or traditional risk management. And so how do I know what's the difference between uncertainty and risk? And the way I describe it is, if it's bounded, if it's something is actionable, then it's more talking about a risk. Where if it's sort of more
philosophical, fluffy. It's just a source of uncertainty. So things will start to mature. Your scope will mature. Your schedule will mature. And now you can sort of bound things into specific actionable risks as you move along. So you go along, and then really the next stage, things starts to happen. So you start to sort of draw down on your contingency. It's all about action. You know, sometimes you hear, traditionally we call them issues, sometimes they're called trends, but the risks start to materialize. You have to make decisions based on your risk analysis. So you start to find maybe you're focused on data. Because data now is being delivered, you're in delivery mode from the project, the organization, and you've got, remember the plan, do, check, act? You're in that check and act. You know, sort of where something, I had some sort of risk response in, is it working? Are we still drifting? Is there something, is the data telling me an emerging risk that I hadn't realized before? Is it getting higher or lower? So you can sort of see, as a risk professional, sometimes where you focus will change as you go along the life cycle of your project or organization. Takes me on to the next one. This is where all the keyboard warriors get a bit excited. Qualitative versus quantitative analysis. The way I look at it, it's an and, it's not an or. Some people out there think it's an or. It's black or white. You either do one. And it's in real life, it's a bit of both. Going back, you know, think about it right up front. You know, very early days when somebody's got an idea and you sort of say to them, what do you think? You're the risk guy, what do you think? Or risk girl. And well, I'm gonna need 10 experts or 6 years historical data. I'm gonna need this. I'm gonna need you to spend a few £1,000s on some software. I'm gonna need, sometimes they just need luck. Is it big or small? But very quickly, you start to get into key decisions. And if I move along, this links in back to James's point. There may be certain key decisions, even very early on. It's a critical decision, and just high or low is not good enough. And you need some sort of quantitative analysis to support a key decision. That's something to be aware of. And then all the way over to the right-hand side, it's about data. So you've no excuse then, because you have real data coming out of your project, your organization. You've no excuse not to do quantitative analysis from that as well. It's real life, back to the check and act as well. So again, just a little bit as you go along, the type of analysis will change, will evolve over time as well. So just keep an eye out for that as well. In fact, this is the key thing, is when you ask, it's back to I think it was called the ad hoc, or sometimes it's called the drive-by or JFDI. Don't Google JFDI, by the way. And this is where you come along. We have to make a big decision tomorrow. I need your help. We have two options. As a risk professional, what do you say? And it comes back to this. How much time have I got? How much resource or cost am I able to assign to it? And that will almost drive the quality. And you cannot have all three. And it's back to the conversation to say, based on the time constraints, which is normally the key constraint on projects, based on the resources I've got, I'm able to give you this quality of output. So just be aware of how that conversation, if you give me more time or more resource, I'll get you a better quality output. So that's the key thing back to analysis. It depends on this bottom triangle. So moving on, that was number 4. Number 5, I touched on a little bit earlier. Oversight versus implementation. It changes. It can change. Particularly where key points on contract award. A lot of it, I've put FIDIC up as a good example. If you go FIDIC Red Book, you're more hands-on. FIDIC Silver Book, EPC, very much hands-off. You're sort of much less influence as a risk professional. So it's very important that you see these comments coming, where your role changes, and you make sure you've worked with the relevant functions across your organization to say you've got an influence over how risk management is done within a different entity, so that you still have that oversight. Yeah. So something to look ahead. Don't wait for it to happen to you. If you know a contract will be awarded, get involved with the contracts teams, commercial teams, make sure you've provided your input into the contractual documentation to make sure you receive the right outputs. You receive them at the right time, in the right format, to the right quality. Also as well, this is quite, even if it's all, you've got complete implementation control, sometimes there are specialist risk assessments. Goes back, I saw this in my, going back, particularly in my 6 years in defense, you might have specialist, and even going back to risk solutions, safety risk assessments, specialist security risk assessments, that as a risk professional, you are not competent to do, yeah? And so make sure, it might be outsourced, make sure again you work with that particular functional. It's back to, again, I'm linking back to James's talk about cross-functional work. You're working with those functions to make sure the outputs of their work come in, so you're able to compare those apples and apples. Otherwise, you run into, I've seen it happen before, you have multiple risk registers or risk reports. This is the cost and schedule risk report. This is the security. This is the safety. And as a project manager, they're confused. So this red risk over here or big risk over here is not the same as that one over there. If that, you know, so just be careful of that as well, that you're working with the across the functions. And then finally, back touching this, a lot of this is about making sure somebody else's outputs align with your required inputs. And we're back to skills again, because if you see you moving into implementation, to oversight, back to implementation, then we're back to resources and skill set. Plan ahead and make sure you're always thinking about what level of resource I need, what type of skills I need as well. That's number 5. And then lastly, number 6, again, something to think about processes. This is probably more, well, actually it's both. It's enterprise and project. You could be operating at group level in an enterprise, or down in a business unit, or a particular team. Similarly in projects, I've got a typical project one, you could portfolio, program, project. Something just to think about is where your risk process is focusing. And there's probably a good example of action versus contingency management. And just be aware of this, you know, sometimes contingency management is, or contingency is calculated and managed at portfolio level. It depends. Sometimes some of it's devolved down under delegations of authority, but just be aware, you may focus maybe on this up here, portfolio level. We're down at project level, it might be action, how effective my actions, analyzing the data, so it's maybe sort of closer to sort of the cold face. So again, your process, you need to just tailor your process. Remember your skills you've got, your capabilities. So you're sort of looking in the right areas depending what level you're operating at as well. So that's number 6 as well, and that's the last one. So just really to recap, and then we'll go into the Q&A. Just, you know, go back. Keywords, remember, whatever the frameworks, avoid those process wars. They've all more in common than different, and try to tweak things, don't fundamentally transform them. Think about the areas of focus in your process may change. We spoke about uncertainty versus risk management, different assessment techniques. And then we spoke about the focus of the application. So whether you're looking at oversight role versus down in the weeds implementation, and along the way, the different resources and capability you need along the way. And that's it. So sort of a quick trot through. Some of that you'll agree with, some you'll disagree with. And so excellent. So if James wants to come back on, I've got a few questions, James, for us both.
Yeah.
So sure. What I'll do is I've got 3 questions that have come in. Sort of one thing I'll say is actually it's quite a few questions I won't be able to cover. So if I don't cover your specific question, feel free to message James or myself on LinkedIn. So the first question, there's a few questions that come around this theme around, we talk about processes, it's about resistance to change. And that's, or maybe you want to change something. You've come into a role, you want to change or tweak the existing risk process, people resist change, and maybe if James goes first to myself, maybe have you any advice, hints or tips to anyone in terms of overcoming or managing that resistance to change?
Thank you for the easy question to start with, Darren. That's very much appreciated. What I would say to that, and perhaps to reflect a bit further on my presentation, would be to integrate risk as much as possible with what already exists within the business. So people are inherently resistant to change. Okay, well, you don't want to change too much then. So add on the risk elements of your work into what already exists from a business process perspective. Enhance those processes with elements of risk management, and ensure that risk isn't a standalone activity, so that it becomes part of your partners within the business job. And in that way, they can see the benefit of it. So it's not something that's weird, it's not something that's new, it's not something that doesn't add value. It's part of their job, and it enhances and integrates within their role. So for instance, as an example, we have a team of investment professionals here. They use financial models all the time, of course. One of the outputs is IRR, an investment rate of return. They are used to dealing with these financial models. They're used to doing sensitivity analysis. Well, a way to enhance that would be to perhaps do Monte Carlo analysis on a wider range of variables, speak the language they understand, and you can do that risk work and enhance their existing processes. So I would say that wholesale change and stock change is not a good idea, and integrate as much as possible with what exists at the moment.
Excellent. No, some good points. I agree with everything you say, and I would add sort of a couple of extra ones. A little trick. Just in my career, I've tended to join or been at the start of things. So the little trick I do is I will start running. I call them risk awareness training sessions, and some people who've been in previous companies I work with have known I've done this, and I make it voluntary. So I'll go into the meeting rooms. It'll be every Sunday or Thursday or Monday, depends where you work, and people will come, and from those you will get the interaction, and very quickly you can start to write names down as to people who are passionate and who are excited, involved across the organization. You start writing those names down, and then because the old way and I call them risk focals. I know some people like risk champions. I don't, because risk champions, then everybody dumps everything on them. They have to, because sometimes I find if you go and ask the business, can you nominate somebody? They will normally nominate the busiest person in the team who didn't want to volunteer for this. So sometimes when you go offering and say, look, I ran a few sessions, I've noticed 2 people in your team who are quite passionate about this. Could I use them as spoken points and just points of contact? So that's something as well. And then back to what you said about something well as terminology and language. It's back to your cross-functional thing, James. Is when we write a process, we have inputs and outputs. So depending where you come in is be flexible. Change your terminology. If say you want to call it an apple as an output and you've called it an orange as an input into yours, be flexible and change your process. Terminology, it's back to process wars as well. Avoid it. So excellent. So the next one then is around a couple of questions on this is about, again, related to both our presentations is we often get asked, so what? Well, what benefit am I getting from all this risk stuff? And I suppose if there are any hints or tips or advice on the contribution or added value of risk management. So I'm going to save you, James. I'll go first on this one, and I'll let you go second. So the one bit of advice I would give is think about measuring 2 things. Think about measuring your activity. So this is about making your own luck. So the things you do, the risk reviews you've had that month, how many training sessions, how many people you've trained, how many things have been updated, or how many, it make your own luck. It shows that there's activity. So they see value from the resource. I'm getting 20 of these a month, 10 of these, you know, and you know, even sometimes what I do is print all the documentation reports you've produced that month and have it sitting on your desk. And that way then when somebody comes in, you can lift it up and go, I produce this amount of information, knowledge based on that we wouldn't have had before. That's, I call that, you could argue, is being selfish. And then the next thing is outcome. So try and work out, you know, in terms of where you were able to work joint. And it's never down to the risk professional in terms of avoiding an overrun, minimizing the impact of a delay. It could have been X, but it was less instead. So watch out for those as well, and make sure you take some of the credit. So that's what my advice: measure some activity to make you sort of be selfish, make your own luck, and try and spot those areas of outcome as well. So I don't know, James, if there's anything else you wanted to offer up on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my experience, I would, in this particular context and with this question, I would probably go down the quantitative route and say, look, you know, here's what happens when you don't have risk management, and here's the value to having it. So something which is close to my heart, being Scottish, and it's a world famous example, is that the Scottish Parliament building was something like 1,000% over budget, right? So the initial capex was 40 million, and very unusually for Scottish people, we spent a lot more than we had initially planned to. So it came in at 400 million at the end, right? So these are things that something, you know, a CEO can grab onto. It's tangible. He doesn't want to waste 400 million. So I would try and highlight it with real life examples, with actual pound or dollar or real attachments to that, give them something they understand. And in that way they can see the value or not. And it's really up to them to take that forward. Darren, I can't hear you.
I'm on mute. Don't worry, Steve. I gotta have it. No, I was just going to say I'm just conscious of time, so I'll sort of wrap up the questions. But I'll just give you the chance, James, if there were, just to reflect back, if there were any key points you just wanted to re-emphasize from your presentation, just maybe to close things off.
Again, just to go back to the integration piece, look, it's just good management, and it's not just the risk guy, you know, skill sets within the business is vitally important. We can't do everything. Skills of various management teams and professionals that I think is a critical success factor in the risk program.
Excellent. So so I think what we'll do is I'll just sort of wrap up on things. So there have been quite a few sort of other questions. I've seen a few messages where people are asking for copies of slides. So what I ask is, we have recorded this if I've worked the technology okay. But feel free to contact. I noticed they're asking for James's slides, not my slides. So maybe they just got a whole lot of pictures if they ask for mine. So contact James on LinkedIn. This is recorded. Big thank you to James. We haven't.
Very welcome.
We're eating into his weekend. Just a reminder as well, if you do need a certificate of attendance, just let me know. And that's it. That's it. So thanks again, James. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So we peaked, I think, sort of close to 30 people, but I know a lot, because of where we're running into the weekend, a lot of people will be watching the recording as well. And that's it. Have a great weekend and speak to you all soon. I'll get those award nominations in. Yeah, and there's no excuse why anybody and everybody cannot submit at least one award nomination, including yourself, James. So I will be watching out for it.
Very good. All
That's
right.
great.
Thank
All
you,
the
Darren.
best. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.